Hi, Barry, and welcome to today's service. On this chilly spring morning, the second weekend of March. Many of you enjoyed all that snow from this weekend. It was unprecedented. I was really shocked to see it. Today's service explores tangents, fractals, and concentric circles, and I'm trying not to let my old trauma over trigonometry activate. Reverend Green can help me relieve some of that old trauma. There's so much going on in the world right now: Arctic blasts, unexpected wars in multiple areas of the planet, continued pandemic worries, loss of an overnight, etc. I'm sorry, loss of an hour overnight, etc., etc., etc. To keep myself steady, I look for signs of peace, and today was blessed with a visit by a goldfinch, the first time in my outside window feeder. I invite you all into service today with the intention of helping us each find our center and grow with love for our world. I invite Claire to light our chalice today.
All right, hello. Our chalice lighting this morning was written by Suzelle Lynch. Each time we light the chalice, we renew our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist faith. With the spark of a match, we make it new again, as fresh and surprising as the first day we encountered this spiritual community and realized we were home. We light this chalice for the renewal of our faith.
Thank you, Claire. Our covenant is the silk that joins our congregation together in a web of interconnection. Please join me in reading with me as you are so moved. We covenant together to make a welcoming community, to walk together in the way of truth and love, to seek the life of the Spirit as it is known by each person, to support each other in thought, word, and deed as we work to build a better world. Our first hymn this morning is This Is My Song. It's hymn number 159 in Singing the Living Tradition. Please join in singing if you are so filled.
This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too and clover, and skies are everywhere as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine.
Our reading this morning was selected by our guest speaker, Reverend Sarah Green.
This is a piece by the poet David Whyte from his book, Consolations, the Solace, Nourishment, and Underlining Meaning of Everyday Words. Courage is a word that tempts us to think outwardly, to run bravely against opposing fire, to do something other beside circumstance, and perhaps above all, to be seen to do it in public, to show courage, to be celebrated in story, rewarded with medals, given the accolades. But a look at its linguistic origin is to look at a more interior direction and towards its original template, the old Norman French. Courage is the measure of our heartfelt participation with life, with another, with community, a work, a future. To be courageous is not necessarily to go anywhere or to do anything except to make conscious those things we already feel deeply, and then to live through the unending vulnerability of those consequences. To be courageous is to seat our feelings deeply in the body and in the world, to live up to and into the necessities of relationship that often already exist with things we find already we care deeply about, with a person, a future, a possibility in society, or with an unknown that begs us on and always has begged us on. To be courageous is to stay close to the way we are made. The French philosopher Camus used to tell himself quietly to live to the point of tears, not as a call for maudlin sentimentality, but as an invitation to the deep privilege of belonging and the way belonging affects us, shapes us, and breaks our heart at a fundamental level. It is a fundamental dynamic of human incarnation to be moved by what we feel, as if surprised by the actuality and privilege of love and affection and its possible loss. Courage is what love looks like when tested by simple everyday necessities of being alive. We become courageous whenever we live closely to the point of tears, with any new possibility made known within inside of us. And whenever we demonstrate a faith in the interior enunciations and align ourselves with new and surprising and heartfelt necessities of even the average existence, to allow ourselves to feel deeply and thoroughly what has already come into being is to change our future, simply by living up to the consequence of knowing what we hold in our affections. From the inside, it can feel like confusion. Only slowly do we learn what we really care about and allow our outer life to be realigned in that gravitational pull. With maturity, that robust vulnerability comes to feel like the only necessary way forward, the only real invitation, and the surest, safest ground from which to step. On the inside, we come to know who and what and how we love and what we can do to deepen that love. Only from the outside and only by looking back does it look like courage.
Thank you, Reverend Sarah. This is Zane. He's going to be my co-coordinator today because apparently he needs all the affection. Our Share the Plate partner this month is Sunflower of Peace. It is a US-based 501c3 registered nonprofit organization whose current mission is to provide medical and humanitarian aid for people affected by violence in Ukraine. Sunflower of Peace was founded in 2014 and since then has worked on empowering orphans, internally displaced persons, and recently those most affected by COVID-19 and the Russian military invasion of Ukraine. Now, we have a special collection this week, and it's going to be that 100% of our non-pledged donations today will be forwarded to Sunflower of Peace. And the reason for that is to help provide first aid and humanitarian support of the besieged people in Ukraine. Contributions for other Sundays in March will continue to be split as usual with this partner. So you can give in any of the ways that are on your screen right now. And please give generously.
про любов. Як ми любились, та й розійшлися, тепер навіки зійшлися знов. Ой, очі, очі, очі дівочі, темні, як нічка, ясні, як день. Ти ж мене очі приворожили, де ж ви навчились зводить людей? Місяць на небі, зіроньки сяють, тихо по морю човен пливе. В човні дівчина пісню співає, а козак чує, серденько мре. Чує, серденько мре. Браво. Спасибо.
I've had the honor of introducing Reverend Sarah Green on many, many occasions. I find that every time she comes to speak to us, I leave with an amazing message that resonates with me for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I suspect this week is going to be no different. Welcome, Reverend Sarah. We're happy to have you again today.
Good morning, everyone. I was saying before we got started that I am joining you in Nashville. It is cold in New Orleans, where I'm zooming in from. So I feel like I'm right there with you, which is the sweetest. We have a reading before I get started. It's by Susan Myers. It's called Mother, Washing Dishes. She rarely made us do it. We'd clear the table instead. So my sister and I tease that someday we'd train our children right and not end up like her, after every meal stuck with red knuckles, a bleached rag to wipe and wring. The one chore she spared us, gummy plates and water greasy and swirling with sloughed peas, globs of egg and gravy. Or did she guard her place at the window, not wanting to give up the gloss of the magnolia, the school traffic humming, sunset, finches at the theater, first sightings of the mail truck at the curb just after noon, delivering a note, a card, the least bit of news. It's apparently about to be spring. We thought it was spring. We were mistaken, but spring is right around the corner. The mask mandates are tentatively being lifted. It looks maybe like rates are going down just enough to tease us that we might be able to plan a summer, perhaps, maybe. At least I feel that bubbling up in me. With work, thinking about life, we keep using quotes post-pandemic, thinking about how to rebuild and build and strengthen powerful youth movements. And there's so much. I was talking to a coworker about planning a retreat for youth in July, and it's March now. And she said, Sarah, almost every week in July, I have an engagement. This is March. That's July. Things are popping up on our calendars left and right. Just yesterday, I saw a robust festival schedule for New Orleans. So after Mardi Gras is festival season, where we have a festival for everything under the sun. Jazz Fest, of course, Crawfish Fest, Satchmo Fest, Po' Boy Fest. I mean, the festivals abound, and they were all on this schedule. Whew. And it starts to get overwhelming because we've come off of 2 years of a different sort of overwhelm. One where we maybe redecorated every house in our room, or took more naps, or worried about our children more than we ever thought were conceivable. And now we're being asked to do things that were once fun and we care about, but it's a new sort of arithmetic. Pun number one. I know, that's good. Thanks, Bina. A new sort of arithmetic. And we're trying to find our new shape. And that requires some settling and some proofing. Oh, wow, 2 in 1 minute. I'm on a roll. Trying to find our new shape, and it's gonna take a while. But as I hear my mother in my ear saying, we ain't got time for all that. Some things are urgent. Some things are pressing, like what's happening overseas. And so we've got to really do some thinking about how we enter and re-enter our worlds. Not that we ever left, but that we're having a lot more asks. So my hope for myself, for you, for Ganuk, for Nashville, is to move forward with a couple of things: clarity, impact, and integrity. We're going to talk a little bit about each one of those. We'll start with clarity. Clarity for me means that there's purpose, and that you know what is your work to do and what is not your work to do, and how much time you have to do what is your work. That's what I mean when I say clarity. More specifically, I think about these things. Capacity. What's your capacity? Are you working full-time plus? Parenting? Trying to figure out how to feed people? That's a certain type of capacity that certainly we're joined by many people in that. But that's going to impact how we show up in the world. And what we've learned over these last 2 years is that is perfectly okay. What's your capacity of your family as a unit, of your church, of your town? Are you, I don't know, I heard about the water in the building. That's going to impact your capacity. And the thing about capacity and a lot of these things is that they'll ebb and flow. They'll ebb and flow. But they must be tended to for that clarity. Secondly, when we're thinking about specifically social movements or what's happening in our justice movements, I often think about safety and security. Our numbers and big displays of power going to be more safe or less safe? Some movements have a politic called security culture, where things are really underground so that people aren't targeted. What are the things you're considering moving into? What's the safety look like? What's the security? Are you gonna be less targeted as a smaller unit or a bigger unit? And I think this also applies to personal things if we're thinking about how we show care in our families. How are we balancing boundaries and what's safe for ourselves, for our homes? And the last question that I often ask about clarity is, what time is it? What time is it on the clock of the world? What time is it in whatever project you're undertaking? Is it a new movement? Is it ages old? Is it one that's recently bubbling up? And all of those ages and stages that we know are going to require new and different things. That's one of the things we learn about faith development, is that a family unit that's been together for 20 years is going to need a different type of family therapy than one that's been together for 2 years and maybe has adoption or all the other ways that families happen. Those same sorts of patterns and the developmental ages and stages work in movements and really at almost every level of community. Those three things will help get us to some clarity about the water that we're swimming in. Let's talk a little bit about impact. There's a lot of ways we can talk about impact, but I want to talk more about the different shapes, going back to this idea of shapes. In the sermon title, I mentioned tangents, fractals, and concentric circles. They're different shapes, and they'll offer different things to a movement, to a project. So let's jump right in. Tangents. Tangents, for those of us who haven't taken math since high school or college, which might have been a long time ago, which, by the way, is me. So if there are math geeks in here, I just ask that we practice grace for what I may try on in my creative ministerial math. We'll just call it math for church. Okay, so here we go. So tangents are lines, could be curves, could be straight, that intersect at one point. I'm kind of looking at Jesse for some, like, I think that's a tangent. So it might look like this is a line, my arm is a line, and then this other line is like, I don't know, S-shaped. And there's this intersecting point, and then they kind of go their own way. They may intersect in the future, they may not. Jesse's smiling. I'm on the straight and narrow. So when I thought about the shape, or it's more of a linear relationship, I thought about coalition building as what this might translate in our movements, in our communities. Coalition building, you might know most familiarly as like NOAH, Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. That's classic coalition. that comes together to build power and moves on some very specific issues. And let me tell you, it can be very confusing if you don't identify that as its purpose. I remember when I was around in the first days of NOAA, and I was young, I was confused. I wanted it to be something very different, but that is not a coalition. A coalition is building power for a couple of very specific intersections. There's an incredible essay by Bernice Johnson Reagan on coalition building, and I'd love to read just an excerpt because, first of all, it's funny and it's pointed. She writes, coalition work is not work done in your home. Coalition work has to be done in the streets. And it's some of the most, and it's some of the most dangerous work you can do. And you shouldn't look for comfort. Some people will come to a coalition and they rate the success of the coalition on whether or not they feel good when they get there. They're not looking for a coalition, they're looking for a home. They're looking for a bottle with some milk in it and a nipple, which does not happen in a coalition. You don't get a lot of food in a coalition. You don't get fed a lot in a coalition. In a coalition, you have to give, and it is different from your home. You can't stay there all the time. You go to the coalition for a few hours and you go back and take your bottle wherever it is, and then you go back and coalesce some more. That is the shape of a coalition. Can be very impactful, as we've seen NOAA do some really incredible things. But without that clarity, can you see how it gets confusing? Can you see, if you're looking for a home, how coalition might really upset your ideas about safety and security? It might have some bearing on what kind of capacity you need. When I was on the Affordable Housing Task Force, I miscalculated the capacity. Not that I wasn't willing to do the one-on-ones, but the capacity for me to put other things aside emotionally, that takes capacity. So the questions of clarity feel like, of the shapes we're going to talk about today, so important when we talk about the shape of tangents and coalitions. Next up, fractals. Okay, this is less of math. We're combining unlike terms here. Fractals is more of a science thing. If you've read a lot of Adrienne Maree Brown, maybe you have heard this term. In fact, Adrienne Maree Brown writes, a fractal is a never-ending pattern. Okay, maybe it's not true. Okay. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. They are created by repeating a simple process over and over again in an ongoing feedback loop. How we are at the small scale is how we are at the large scale. The patterns of the universe repeat at scale. There's also a structural echo that suggests two things. One, that shapes and patterns are fundamental to the universe, and two, that we practice at a small scale what we can reverberate to the largest scale. Grace Lee Boggs articulated it in what might be the most used quote of my life. Transform yourself to transform the world. This doesn't mean to get lost in the self, but rather to see your own lives and work and relationships as a front line, a first place we can practice justice, liberation, and alignment with each other and the planet. It's a little bit of Adrienne Maree Brown talking about fractals. Fractals in nature look like snowflakes. They also look like spirals, but they really are everywhere. Fractals. I think about my home as a fractal of my UU principles, of my political commitments. And sometimes when that capacity thing is real low, this fractal idea, the shape of a fractal, helps keep me grounded and connected. To say, you know, I really don't have time to do, honestly, much else, anything. But I have my fractal, I have my home, I have my children, I have the things I allow in and out of it. How can that be a space where, for example, abolition flourishes in how I speak to, how we speak to one another, how we deal and assert boundaries? It takes a little bit of self-talk to make that feel like enough, but I promise you that's enough. And not only is it some sort of consolation prize, it's actually applicable on the larger scale. When I think about the Zapatista movement or so many other movements that bubble up from the ground, fractals, fractals and fractals and fractals until it's an eruption. How many movements can you think of that started that way? So many. The uprisings of 2020, those were fractals. And wow, what an impact. Wow. Fractals. Lastly, let's talk about concentric circles. Concentric circles are shapes within larger shapes, within larger shapes, within larger shapes. So perhaps if you've sat in on a 5th grade social studies class, they'll have you look at self, neighborhood, community, city, state, country, continent. That's an example of a concentric circle. It's a little bit like fractals, but what I want to point out about, is that what I mean? Yeah, it's a little bit like fractals in that what happens at a small scale reverberates out. But what I want to point out about concentric circles is that each has their own work. That's my hypothesis here. So in a fractal where you might be, okay, we are going to really seat ourselves into the practices of abolition. A concentric circle might look like a little more of like a committee where your task is this focused thing that you know contributes to the larger work, that makes a movement in that way. So, where you use, we know about a committee. So I will not use that to demonstrate my point here. However, I do want to get us a little bit into the current moment. I have an example for Veterans for Peace, which I think is such an incredible organization. In my time in Pensacola, I knew a couple of folks who were involved in that. And I think in times such as these, where there's so much unknown, but also we know patterns. We know patterns of US militarism. We know patterns of colonialism. It's a great group to keep us grounded, I have found. So in Veterans for Peace, which if you don't know about it, I would encourage you to look it up. They have working groups. It's maybe a little different than a committee. I don't know. That's for you to decide. So a working group has on their website, even very transparent, a clear mission and action steps. So this working group that I found is called Democracy, Constitution, War Powers Working Group. And their mission states, will demand that public servants at all levels of government work with the people. Will demand that public servants at all levels of government will work with the people to refine and implement these things, adhering to the spirit and intent of their oath of office, initiate immediate unilateral ceasefires all over the world, put America and world to work, providing employment opportunities for all in meaningful work at living wages, replace and or humanely and privately prosecute public servants who will not do their jobs or break the law. And then they have a couple of action items. Clear. What I love about it is that it's not the whole thing. So I think does a couple of things in alignment with our clarity. First of all, we can tailor our actions to our capacity. It's like, all right, I got the worship committee. Well, clear most of the time. And there's a little bit of safety and security. When working these big movements, having that specificity and that piece that you're holding helps to diffuse power in a way that's similar to fractals. So no one's gonna get the blame or retaliation for all of it. And it helps. Sometimes movements can function like the Zapatistas, where it's like, I'm not really sure who's in charge. Not in an unorganized way, but in a intentionally protecting ourselves way. Concentric circles, choosing your piece of the pie and being laser focused on make sure that is happening well. Impact. Lastly, integrity. And this is where I will leave you because it's a tough one. But at the heart of it, the question for me is, who is your crew? Who is your crew? And not the crew that you want to have a dinner party with. Here's what organizer Mia Mingus asked, or the work that she's done, what she calls pod mapping. She says, your pod is made up of the people that you would call on if violence, harm, or abuse happened to you, or the people that you would call on if you wanted support in taking accountability for violence, harm, or abuse that you've done. Or if you witnessed violence, or if someone you care about was being violent or being abused. I don't know about you, but that's different than a dinner party. That's different than a dinner party. Who do you want in those moments of accountability where you've been harmed, you've harmed others, or you're witnessing harm being done? I'm gonna leave you with that project to come up with 5 people that would be somewhere in that constellation as the first tool for having integrity in our work. And, I've been trying to really make this personal and movement based, but wow, if I didn't have that group of people as a parent that I could call on when I've done harm. Whew. Integrity. It's hard, hard, hard work. It's so good. It's so good work. And we're better off for it as we're sifting through all this information and sometimes propaganda and so much urgency and false urgency and reopenings and mixed information. But as you go through this week, whatever it may bring, anchor into your clarity, work for impact, and labor with others for that individual and collective integrity. May it be so. Godspeed.
Oh my God, Reverend Sarah, you did it again. I was furiously taking notes because so much of that resonated with me. I got to tell you, one of the things that I have struggled with for the last, was it 20 years of the pandemic? Anyway, is where can I make the most impact without killing myself? Because it all feels so overwhelming, and you just gave me the tools that I need to find where I can engage myself and how I can impact others better. So thank you so much for that. I hope everybody got good juju out of that, just like I did. So our next hymn will be hymn number 298, Wake Now My Senses, which I think is musically what Reverend Sarah just said to us. So join in if you are so moved.
Wake now my senses and hear the earth call. Feel the deep power of being in awe. Keep with the web of creation your vow, giving, receiving as love shows us how. Wake now my reason, reach out to the new. Join with each pilgrim who quests for the true. Honor the beauty and wisdom of time. Suffer thy limit and praise the sublime. Wake now, compassion, give heed to the cry. Voices of suffering fill the wide sky. Take as your neighbor both stranger and friend, praying and striving their hardship to end. Wake now my conscience, with justice thy guide. Join with all people whose rights are denied. Take not for granted a privileged place. God's love embraces the whole human race. Wake now my vision of ministry clear. Brighten my pathway with radiance here. Mingle my calling with all who will share. Work toward a planet transformed by our care.
That song just reverberated all the way through my household. Yay me. I hope you all joined in singing. I personally love singing, and I hope each one of you gets a moment to share joy like that, however that resonates for you. We've come to our time of joys and concerns. For those of you joining us on YouTube, thank you so much for coming today. We'll see you next week. Jesse, if you can please